best way to protect players is to regulate the product, to supervise it. The challenge then is to do it in a way that is balanced and allows the industry to apply for a license in order to use this license and compete with the remaining black market operators.
So here we are at Sigma Europe 2021, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Dr. Joerg Hofmann. It's so good, we've met before, and it's so good to be with you again today. You are the past president of IMGL, Head of Gaming and Betting Law Practice Group, Malta's law firm.
Correct, one of the past presidents.
That is, well, that's brilliant. Thank you for correcting me there. I want to just ask you your take on regulation. Now, this is something that we've been talking about an awful lot recently, but your take on regulation and the development throughout 2021. What's been happening?
We see more and more jurisdictions turning into regulated markets, like my own country as well, in Germany, Netherlands, Spain. We see also sort of reviewing critical analysis of existing regulation. Like in the UK, where they're now going to look at the Gaming Act and see what they can do better, what needs to be changed. I think this is very important. And with that regulation, we see within that jurisdictions also regulators, or we can say legislators, looking more into the details of regulating, finding new spots which probably need to be covered. They also have to adopt new technologies, artificial intelligence, and since technology is driving this industry, regulators, and in particular legislators, are always behind. The challenge is to be up to date and follow that development. And so far I think it's very interesting times at the moment with so many new technologies, ideas and products coming up.
Well, it's also because the industry, as you mentioned, is so young. It's a new industry and
yes.
it's finding its feet. And you mentioned there that you're catching up, you're playing catch up all the time. But there's so many new gambling jurisdictions. For instance, we're looking at Sweden and more recently, as you mentioned, Netherlands and Germany. Would you say that this then eliminates harmful gaming or unregulated gaming, and illegal gaming operators are taking that fatal blow, or are they finding their ways around this?
I wouldn't call it a fatal blow. I mean, it's aimed to eliminate the unlicensed or illegal industry, but that is a matter of enforcement, and as we all know and as experience shows, it's hard to enforce against the black market in the internet. But I think it speaks its own language and it sends a clear message. It shows that politicians start to think about it and probably to learn that the best way to protect players is to regulate the product, to supervise it. The challenge then is to do it in a way that is balanced and allows the industry to apply for a license in order to use this license and compete with the remaining black market operators. The best example how not to do is my jurisdiction in Germany. They're trying to introduce a new interstate treaty, which is the new regulation. For the first time ever in my country, it's possible to apply for licenses, but the content is so much restricted. The taxation is too high. So I think if we talk to suppliers, we've got the figures already regarding gross gaming revenues, we are losing between 80 and 90% of our turnover and of our customers to black market operators. And I think it would be so easy if you provide regulation which makes yourself competitive, that we do not need black market operators. They will be tempted to apply for a license because they can operate in an environment which makes it attractive. As long as that is not the case, we still have these discussions. But if it's interdiction and restriction, you must also consider enforcement. And since enforcement does not really work, you cannot kill the outside industry. They're moving around. Things are obstacles, but it's an endless discussion. It's highly theoretical. So these jurisdictions need to make their own experience that it was probably the wrong direction. Then we can compare this to the early stage in Italy, where they did the same mistake and the traffic went out of the country. A few years later, after an evaluation, they considered to change it and to make it more competitive and to allow more products to be offered. And all these players came back. It wasn't new players, it were the old players left the market and returning to the environment which could protect them in the future.
But it's an interesting topic about regulation, and we're going to come to what's happened to regulation over the last couple of years and through the pandemic in just a second. But you talk about emerging markets, you talk about new regulated territories, but surely because there's an awful lot of work going into research and experiential understanding of regulation, surely these new territories are able to glean information from other territories that are well established.
This would be the ideal world, and if the legislators, the politicians, and in particular the regulators would start being more open-minded, starting that dialogue with the industry, they could learn even from the industry. It's not only that regulators can exchange knowledge and experience, which happens, by the way, of course. We have the IAGRA Association, there's GREF in Europe, so they meet and exchange knowledge, not all of them, but that's fine. But this is a very one-sided view. The industry, the international operators, which are compliant in various jurisdictions, they have the experience, what works best, what is feasible. So if we just talk to each other, we make a move, a step forward into the right direction.
And this is what I'm hearing from the industry itself as well. They're happy to share information. They're happy to open up to be able to make a difference to regulation.
Right.
And they want it as well.
And it works. I'm remembering the old days in the UK when Jenny Williams was in her position for 10 years. If you talk today to a lawyer in the UK or an operator in the UK, and even could be my client, well, they're all saying today there's no communication at all. It's just behind walls. Jenny Williams understood you can trust some people. I would say the majority. You will always find some pirates of the Caribbean, but I don't talk about these people. I talk about the serious, the licensed operators, stock exchange listed operators. And they bring experience, knowledge, and they know technology. They can even put you into the future and say, this is what comes next. AI is one of these examples. Digital currency. Today, probably it's something which is not the most favorable subject to discuss. But I think in the future, and even in a global perspective, things will change. And that's why it's so important. And the quality of regulation and the quality of offerings much depends on who is heading the authority. If it's a person who is approachable, things go very well. Imagine Birgitte Sand. She was everywhere. You could talk to her in Denmark, and people or the industry loved to apply in Denmark and operate in a legal certain environment which offers competitive circumstances in that environment.
You mentioned before, you talked about playing catch up with regulation, and of course we talked about shared experience, which would very much change that dynamic. But you talked about before about playing catch up, and of course we've just been through, getting on now for 2 years of pandemic, which has meant that so many of players have migrated online simply because there is no land-based gambling. How has that affected regulation, and how has regulation had to respond to that? I assume very, very quickly.
I think first of all it has affected the industry because there was a higher demand, and indeed people moved from land-based premises, which were shut down, to online gaming, in particular slots, for instance. The effect on regulation, I think the impact on regulation is rather that regulators consider there is a demand for protecting these players even more, because they have more time to play, more time to seek sort of entertainment and probably get closer to these threats of addiction. Don't think that this applies to the majority of players, but you see these concerns being brought up, but I don't think that it will really change regulation. It will make people more conscious to monitor player behavior and make sure they will be guided and not lost.
And this is a conversation that I've been having with the industry over and over again recently, because so many of the reputable companies have been saying, well, we want to protect our players, we don't want harmful gaming, because we want a sustainable industry.
It's absolutely the truth. I believe this is really the truth. This is what they want. Those who are targeting players who probably are addicted, spend their money but lose their money, this is the wrong industry. But this is not the industry we were talking about if we discuss compliance or if we discuss serious operators. They want a lifetime value of a player for many, many years,
Yes.
probably generations, and be loyal to the brand and the offerings. And they do everything to monitor the player behavior. And there's so many measures which can be applied in order to reach this goal.
And of course, we are talking about a small but important percentage of problem or harmful
Absolutely.
gambling. We're talking about a small percentage, and of course, the regulation and all of the things that the industry are doing are there to protect those players and also to make sure that it is entertainment. It really is. What are the biggest challenges facing regulation at the moment? So anybody that is involved in regulatory bodies, what are the largest challenges? Is it the illegal companies, or is it just compliance? Is it getting an understanding across the industry?
I think if you talk about regulation and content of regulation, it's being up to date. It's the challenge to improve and enhance the own regulation, just to make it competitive, for instance, because you can only protect a player if the player is playing within that protected environment, meaning under a licensed operator. If the player decides to move outside into the black market, the best protective regulation will not work because it happens somewhere else. I think this sort of balance to understand and to develop is one challenge. The other challenge is what I said before, to be up to date. We see at conferences and shows like this, we see there's new technologies, there's artificial intelligence which can serve as a tool to even protect players better, which can serve to improve customer service. And what we see today is fine. What we will see in 10 years is unimaginable. So regulators also need to get this sort of information as soon as possible. And of course, trust those who provide it and develop things together. It's all about this dialogue. I think that is the challenge. And we don't need to discuss black market as one of the major challenges. There will always be some black market, but the way to deal with black market cannot be interdiction or restriction. It can only be proper regulation, which makes the black market offerings unnecessary because the players will find what they are looking for within their own jurisdiction.
Well, you mentioned dialogue just there being crucial to regulation and to suppliers being able to move forward in this together. And you've seen, we are here today at Sigma. There are thousands of people here.
It's full.
It is amazing. It's so brilliant to be able to have this opportunity to talk to each other. How important are events like this to increase those dialogue opportunities?
These events, like I would call it these hybrid events, where you have the floor, the exhibition on one hand, that's the commercial part for the industry, meeting, selling, buying, and looking around what's new, what's next, and of course meeting the community. And then the other part is the conference. The conference is absolutely key for the success of this sort of exchange, of dialogue. You see some regulators appearing on panels, listening to panelists. For my taste, they're not enough. But this is the start of a new era of in-person conferences. But across Europe and elsewhere, those conferences, which were attended by regulators, are the best. And you can always see this is where dialogue works, because you meet each other, and off the records, between the lines, in the social functions, you can talk, and you have not to fear. You will not fear that this is something where you cannot trust your contact partner just to speak to. I think that makes things better.
We've been meeting online for so long now. It is just so good to be meeting in person.
Absolutely.
Joerg, thank you so much for being with me.
It was just fun, and I'd love to see you again. Thank you, Trudy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.